Commissioners. We always appreciate the opportunity to share with you and with the public a little bit more about what the Board of Elections has been doing over the past year, as well as what we've got on tap for next year. I did want to take a moment and acknowledge those who are with me, and that's our Deputy Director, David Payne, and our Fiscal Officer, Tu Nguyen, to answer any questions that you might have that I might not be able to answer.
Welcome.
Well, again, thank you very much. We appreciate take the opportunity to publicly thank our staff at the Board of Elections, as well as the thousands of people that might be watching that who've served as one of our 6,800.
Did you say thousands of people that might be watching?
Hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
Hundreds of thousands? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
I'm sure I heard that right.
Yeah, you did hear that right. So, but we had 6,800 poll workers, and some of them may be watching as well, that we had to recruit and train for the 3 elections that we had this season. And the fact that we have just brought our most recent election to a close, it did kind of remind us of all the work that we've done over the course of the year. One of the major things that we've been doing while we've been conducting all these 3 elections is we've been evaluating voting systems.
Tons of people.
We had narrowed the field during the course of the year. We did mock elections. We held demonstrations. We had the vendors come in for demonstrations to our staff, went out to site visits around the state. We had them again here on site. We did the mock elections. We got feedback from the public. We had videos online based on the recommendation of the commissioners. We did some videos online so we could get public feedback. And all of that led us to deciding to recommend to our board a hybrid system from election system and software that'll allow Franklin County voters the option of voting on paper or voting on what might be more familiar to them as the touchscreen voting machine that they've been using. So, but it gives those voters that option. And I want to extend my thanks to County Administrator Ken Wilson, as well as your OMB Director, Zach Telerik, for their support in our efforts. Now that the state is getting ready, they're getting ready to finalize their processes for establishing state term contracts. Once that's completed in the very near future, that we'll be able to finalize our contracts and the agreements that we have to have in place with the state and with the vendor to bring those, get that equipment in. But we do see that we are still on target for implementation for the May primary. So one of the other big things that we've had on our calendar this year was the special election in the 12th Congressional District. As you can imagine, given the political environment, the eyes of the nation were upon Franklin County for that election. And I know I'm a little bit biased, but I think we did a very, very good job of carrying out that election. One of the first things we started was back in June, we noticed some anomalies of district assignments, and so we did just a wholesale review of every voter and every congressional district assignment to make sure that every voter was voting in the right congressional district. And then we took multiple steps through multiple means to notify any of the voters that where we did identify a correction was needed. And then we made sure, because we obviously provided a lot of service to those voters who showed up for the August election to cast their vote on election day, but also for early vote. But one of the things we prepared for was, because the advertising was throughout the county, we knew there were going to be voters who don't vote in the 12th Congressional District who were going to show up and expect to vote. And so we prepared by getting the information out to as many of our locations. We made an effort to get it to all of the locations that weren't involved in the 12th Congressional, so that if voters showed up to cast a ballot, that they would understand, oh, my poll's closed. No, it's not. You don't live in an area that's involved in the 12th Congressional District. And that's understandable. A lot of individuals may not necessarily know what congressional district and when they see the advertising, they think that they're able to vote in that election. And so it was very helpful. It did cut down on the number of calls we got, and we did have a lot of folks who did show up on election day at the Board of Elections, and our staff handled that very professionally to let people know with maps, as well as being able to look up on our poll pads to show voters you don't really live in the 12th Congressional District, and it makes people feel confident about the process. And so the other thing that we did right before the primary of this year was to install an Albert sensor. This sensor, we worked with the county's data center, but it was provided to us through a program that's been instituted by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. The Albert sensor is a network sensor that would allow us to identify, or allow the Homeland Security to identify nefarious activity that looks like it's trying to penetrate our network. This would be in addition to the existing cybersecurity network monitors that the data center has in place. So it would kind of a belt and suspender approach, but it, again, it was valuable for us to have that in place. We had, it is important to note that our voting machines and our election management software aren't connected to the internet, but our voter registration software is connected to the county's network. And so having these monitors in place allowed us to provide an additional layer of security when it comes to our voter registration network. It again allowed us to both, it provided an automated alert mechanism for both traditional as well as advanced network threats. And having this relationship now with Homeland Security and the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is supported by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, having that relationship allows us to access more resources that can allow us to ensure our security, our cybersecurity in the coming years. One of the other things from a network standpoint is that we upgraded our website in cooperation with the data center. That happened in the middle of the year, but it does make it a lot more functional for our users, particularly those with disabilities, because everything is on one page and it's easier to, there's less drilling down to find things on our website. So again, that made it a lot easier. One of the things I did want to kind of acknowledge was our petition and campaign finance. It's one of those activities that people don't really realize we do, but it was a Herculean task during the middle of the summer, well, not the early part of the summer, as we were preparing for the August special, is that we had to check over 220,000 petition signatures for all these statewide initiatives in the Columbus Community Bill of Rights, the State Issue 1, the drug reform initiative, the kidney dialysis initiative that was on the, that didn't make it to the ballot, and then the Libertarian Reform, Libertarian Party formation petitions. All of that had to be done in just a few short weeks. Again, 220,000 petition signatures. And then for the entire year, we had almost a twofold increase in the number of petition signatures we had to check. And it's, and again, our effort to check those petitions, it takes a lot of time because we want to make sure that we get that right. And so we're trying to look at as many ways that we can try and count that petition as a valid signature. And so our folks put a lot of effort into that in order to get that done in a short time frame. Was a really Herculean effort. And so I want to just give a shout out to our staff in the petition finance section. Because again, it's one of those things people don't know
Some
about.
candidates don't always make that an easy task.
Right.
You're absolutely right. So
It's something that has to be done, and it's so critically important to the
Right.
whole workings of everything you're doing, so.
absolutely. And again, it's for folks, people who are behind and supportive of those initiatives, that the effort to check those petitions and make sure that they're right is an important function that we perform. It's one that people don't really realize. And then for candidates as well, we had several hundred candidates whose
Yeah.
petitions were checked over the course, or the early part of the year when we check petitions when candidates begin the process of getting on the ballot. So again, it's significant effort, and again, our staff did a great job in that. And it really is one of those, it's not just that division, it's pulling in everybody in the office, checking, including the both of us, the director and deputy director, checking petitions. So it's an important function. So one of the other important functions that we perform is recruitment of poll workers. This time around, that's our precinct election official division. People are still really love our poll books, the electronic poll books, and how simple and efficient it is for those that continue to be positively received by the public. This past general election, because training is an important part, we always say is that people don't see the 44 employees who work at the Board of Elections. They rarely do. The people that really represent the Board of Elections to the public are our poll workers. And so the important part of training those poll workers so that they project, that they're able to perform the functions that they need to perform, and that they are doing it effectively and represent the Board of Elections positively. As part of that, we actually shifted our training to 3 locations this time around to make it more convenient for our poll workers to get trained. Some of it is also to relieve the parking situation at the Board of Elections. So the less training, the more training we have off-site, the better off we are. But it also makes it more convenient for our poll workers to be trained at sites throughout the county. And then one of the things that we've always done, we've done for quite a while is practice makes perfect, which is that last weekend before the election. This time around, we moved that activity to the Afrocentric High School, which again makes it easier for our poll workers to access. But we also found that we saw an increase in the number of people who took advantage of the practice makes perfect activity. So it is one of those last minute refreshers, because sometimes somebody will receive training several weeks before the election, and so they appreciate the opportunity to have that one last refresher, and it's usually the Friday, Saturday, Sunday before election, where poll workers can come in and get that last refresher. And again, we had an increase. We had 38% of our poll workers took advantage of the Practice Makes Perfect training for that refresher, and normally we've seen about 25%. And so it was good to see an increase with that move to a new location. So I think that's a very positive sign, and we'll look forward to continuing that in the future. Our Youth at the Booth program continues to be a successful means for us to find new poll workers, as well as bring young people into the process. This year we saw 554 students from 35 schools participated in the most recent general election. And so again, that continues to be a good source for poll workers. And again, it does get the young people involved. Our Voter Services Division, we improved our provisional ballot processing methods.
Ed, I'm
Yes.
sorry, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Do you notice, with the Youth at the Booth, and you said you have 554 students from 35 schools, have you noticed more school districts canceling school that day?
No, I've not seen that. I mean, they typically hold the training session.
Some do. The Hilliard schools cancel school that day, so that the students
Very
aren't
good.
in school because their schools are voting locations. And I know there are others that do it. I'm just wondering if you're seeing it or in many districts around Central Ohio, because I know there's a handful of school districts other than Hilliard that do.
I can check with our location managers and our precinct election officials, but I've not been made aware that we've seen an increase in that. We do recognize, we do get some comments from school officials because of the safety concerns, but I've not heard a whole lot about in terms of
In the
closing
last 3
locations.
or 4 years, last 3 years probably, Hilliard has canceled school on election day, primary and general, just for the sheer purpose of, not having people coming in and out of school on election day for safety concerns. But I know that there's at least a few other school districts that do it as well. I'm just wondering if it's an increasing trend that school districts are looking to do that.
I can certainly look into it and get back with you as well on
Just
it.
curious.
But,
Sorry.
that's okay. Again, in terms of that Youth at the Booth, we just do appreciate that. And we've seen more and more schools being willing to do that. Part of the challenge with the Youth at the Booth too is that schools are moving the civics component of their education to junior year, where they're 16 years old and 17 years old, and not necessarily being able to work the polls at that stage. And so that makes it a little bit more challenged, but still we're working, and we still see an increasing number of schools that are willing to participate. As I was saying, with regard to our Voter Services Division, we did go through a process in the end part of 2017 to identify ways in which we can improve the processing of our provisional ballots, because we do continue to see a significant number of voters who have to vote provisionally because they've moved and haven't updated their registration, or they've moved here from another county. But again, by streamlining and improving that process of checking those, because again, it's a growing number. And then the other, in the run-up to the August special congressional election, as well as the general election, we saw a huge number of new registrations and updated registrations, online utilization of myohiovote.com to do online updating of your registration, and all of that led to the tens of thousands of registrations, and actually bringing us up to 881,797 registrations in the general election, which is a record for Franklin County. It's a huge number. We saw after we counted all the votes yesterday and certified the results, our turnout for the November election was over 55%. And so again, that's a very high number. It was a very high number. We had a 42% turnout in the special election in August, which is an incredibly high amount in a special election. And then just over 55% in the November election. So there's definitely an interest, and so we do everything we can to process those in the most efficient manner so that people are on the rolls, but that we also maintain the rolls for removing those who may, those who have passed away. We get reports from the state. We get reports from the county of those who've been incarcerated, because we want to remind that a convicted felon who is no longer serving time is able to re-register to vote, but when they're serving their sentence, their incarceration, they are ineligible to vote. And so we go through a number of different steps to make sure that we're keeping those registration rolls as accurate as possible. So. Did want to note, we have some statistics there about this year's absentee activity. In person increased by 345% over the last comparable election in 2014. So again, a significant increase in person. We had over 54,000 people showed up at the early vote site to cast their ballot this time around. And again, that's a very it shows a sign that people are utilizing that in-person method, as well as absentee by mail. Absentee by mail grew by 17% over the comparable election in 2014, and we saw over 100,000 people who took advantage of absentee by mail. And then we continue to go to our nursing homes. We continue to go to the hospitals on election day, and then the day before election day we go to the county jail to make sure that we're able to, those who are awaiting trial are able to cast their ballot as well. And again, it's an indication, and we want to, over the course of the next several years, work on trying to encourage more people to take advantage of voting by mail, voting at the early vote center, to, again, as much as we can relieve the election day traffic by encouraging people to vote early. I think the better off we are. So from a logistics standpoint, we lined up, for the first time this past election, the Board of Elections had equipment lined up, ready to go in the event of a precinct level power outage. A lot of planning and preparation came in handy, because we actually experienced 3 significant power outages during the course of the general election earlier this month. In each of those instances, we were able to respond quickly with backup generators, additional supply materials to help ensure that voters were able to continue to vote. And the BOE during 2019 and beyond will continue to work to refine that. We've had some preliminary meetings with the City of Columbus to try and access and work on ways in which we can work cooperatively to do that, as well as the county's emergency management agency to find ways in which we can improve and refine that process so that we can, again, make sure that we're better prepared for things that those happen. We know power outages happen. So at this point, I did want to turn it over to the Deputy Director because he was actually out in the field on election day when we had those power outages, and he'd just tell you a little bit about those. Oh, yeah.
So as the director mentioned, one of the things that we emphasize with our staff is to expect the unexpected, and to the extent you can, prepare for the unexpected. He mentioned that we had backup generators that we took out, and as you can imagine, on election day, as you remember, Mother Nature threw us a bit of a curveball in that we had heavy winds, and we had 3 polling locations that went down because they didn't have electricity. And with electronic voting machines and electronic poll books, you can imagine that electricity is somewhat important. So we had our staff go out with these backup generators, and we were able to bring up all of the voting locations with a minimal amount of disruption. One of the things that I did as soon as we found out that we had these locations going down, I went out and let the folks know that the cavalry is coming, that there were backup generators coming. But I was so impressed with the staff that we had. The polling locations it was calm. They were processing the voters. They switched to paper ballots. It was just really impressive. And I was so glad. I told all of the poll workers I was sorry that this happened to them, but I was so glad that it happened here because they were so calm, they were so professional. And just a shout out to all of our 6,800 poll workers that do a fantastic job. And as the director mentioned, they really are the face of the Board of Elections. And so a shout out to those folks. One of the other things that I did want to mention, a different program that we have going and that we're very proud of, is we work with the Ohio State University and a number of high schools in Franklin County to work with disabled students. And we were recognized recently by the state of Ohio as a program that they're recommending be replicated throughout the state, working with disabled students. We have them as poll workers, and we also hired a disabled student to work at the Board of Elections full-time. And as much as I think we're teaching that student life skills, I can tell you that that student has taught us so much more than we ever expected. So again, we won a statewide award there, and we were recognized nationally for our work with disabled students. So very proud of that, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
And with that, we'll do is to move on to some of the things that we anticipate for 2019. Most obviously, the biggest endeavor we've got is the implementation of the new voting system for the May primary. There are going to be aspects of the Board of Elections activity that aren't going to change as a result of the very little impact on absentee by mail processing with the new system. There will be slight changes to early vote and how that will process. But even though there's a lot of areas where there's not a lot of change, there are some significant things that we'll be preparing for, including the election programming, poll worker training materials will be changing, logic and accuracy testing for the new voting equipment will change, storage and transport of voting equipment. We still have 350 plus voting locations, but how we get those machines there is going to change slightly. Our supply pickup process before election, as well as our election night drop-off, those processes will change. We're working on those. Our voting location setup. In the past, we've given a lot more flexibility to the voting location managers for setting things up. I think as we go forward, we'll actually be giving more guidance on exactly how the location is structured so that voters can flow through that process more efficiently, and making sure that the voter doesn't leave without finally putting that ballot into the precinct scanner. And so those are just a few of the different changes or things that will occur that we're preparing for. And it should be said that many of these processes are going to be made easier because of the new system. Opening and closing polls, those types of things will be easier, but it's changed nonetheless, and different things will require planning and additional resources. And so the other item that we'll be doing in 2019 is going to be a public education effort. While we're adding all these steps to implement the new system, we're also going to be engaging in a public education effort to inform voters about the new system, and not just informing them about the new system and how to use it, but also about building voter confidence in the new system. Because again, that's important that people feel confident that it's secure, that it's efficient, but that their vote is going to be counted accurately. We'll be devoting time and energy in 2019 to evaluating a new voter registration system. I think last year we talked about the fact that we were looking at upgrading our existing system, but in consultation with Adam Lukaup, your CIO, as well as with Zach Telerik, your budget director, and Carl Cuthbert and the purchasing department team, is that we've been working on identifying and putting specifications together and a bid together for an entirely new voter registration system, as opposed to upgrading the existing one, in order to ensure that we've got long-term software support and a company that has that experience in securing the voter registration software system. And so we're working on that, and we'll continue to work on that in 2019. Also, during 2018, we worked with Homeland Security on cybersecurity assessments. Secretary of State's office also assisted with providing consultants that aided us in cybersecurity assessment. And so in the coming year, we'll continue to work with county, state, as well as federal officials to help ensure that our election systems remain secure. And then finally, with all of these larger initiatives that we've got, is that we'll be devoting the additional time and energy to assessing our building and parking needs. We've been working with Deputy Administrator Long on working with Pizzuti to assess our space needs, but also the impact that it's going to have on parking and building needs at the Early Vote Center. As you may be aware, that Bank of America just began construction of a bank on the site near the Board of Elections, which will take up some of that parking, as well as when Home Buys, which is going to be replacing Kroger's in the space at the Early Vote Center, the Morse Road location, that's going to create some additional parking demands on the site. And so we'll be working with your team to help develop solutions, and it may be multi-pronged in terms of trying to find different ways to try and relieve that strain on parking by either improving the efficiency, trying to drive more people to vote absentee by mail, by potentially putting more equipment in place to process more voters more quickly so that we can turn around the parking spaces on the site. And then finding ways to maybe potentially shuttle staff across the street so that we can try and encourage and make the most efficient use of what we have as possible. So that will be on top of all the other things we've got going on. So that's what lies ahead for the Board of Elections in 19. And before I conclude, I just wanted to thank the commissioners again for all of your support for the work that we do, as well as the great support we get from your team in Ken Wilson and Zach Telerik, Chris Long, Gary Collins, Adam Luckhaupt, as well as Matt Frank and the team at the print shop, Director Darla Reardon and the folks in the facilities management, and then finally Lieutenant Charlie Brown and the folks at Sheriff Baldwin's office, who again help us do the job that we do, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the support of the entire team in Franklin County. So once again, I do want to extend my thanks, and if there are questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Are there any comments or
Thank
questions?
you. You know, one of the things I just wanted to mention quickly is at the Early Vote site, there were so many people that were so very helpful. And I spent some time up there, and when I brought my daughter to vote, and she's in a wheelchair, everybody treated her with such respect and kindness. It was very much appreciated. Our voting process is so very important every year, and I think what you and the team do over at the Board of Elections is critically important every year. And I think that what you did this past season proves that, you know, when we educate people in the community about the importance of voting every year, people will come out to vote. And I think we need to make it as easy as we can. And so thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. And I think the new system will do that, as well as the work that we'll do to make sure that the public is aware of the new system. I guess, because again, I think the machines themselves will make it far easier for voters to cast their ballot. And again, it's just a matter of, as we implement it, and then educating the public about the security, as well as the actual how to, conducting or casting their ballot. Because again, in many ways, it'll be like they're used to, and many of our voters are used to casting their ballot by mail, and are used to filling in that oval on a piece of paper. But then we also have a lot of folks who are used to casting their ballot on an electronic machine and like the electronic machine, and we'll continue to be able to do that. But we'll also have a very real paper component of it that they can confirm that their ballot is being cast correctly.
We've had this conversation with PFM and Deputy Director Long, or at least I have. Encourage you in your conversations with them moving forward as it relates to parking over the coming year, in preparation for the next early vote round, and certainly for the presidential year. But the conversations I've had with Deputy Director Long and PFM, and the conversations I think you guys should have, should be, as you're planning for the parking, I think you also need to plan for the traffic flow through the parking lot. When I was up there, the couple times that I was up there this year, not only do we need to be able to manage the parking, but I think we also need to be able to manage the way the traffic flows through that lot. And I know that CPD did a fantastic job, but CPD also has its challenges in managing the way that the traffic moves through there. And so as we do that, and as we have those conversations, managing the striping, managing the way that the traffic moves through there, and the way that CPD is able to then use those markings to help move people through that lot, and working with the landlords up there to be able to do that, I think would be important. I had, the chance to engage with some of CPD while I was up there, provide them with some coffee that morning. But they were challenged because of the traffic trying to come off of Morse Road, and then backing up into our parking lot because they were having a hard time moving people through. And so I think we need to take those things into account as we plan for this in the future.
Absolutely, because we did identify that.
Before you respond, because I just want to build on something that Commissioner O'Grady just brought up, because I think that there's, to me, the most critical part of this is this parking issue with these new entities coming in that area. But connected to the parking are the people management, because as Commissioner O'Grady was indicating, when you go up there, you're dealing with the traffic coming in the cars, but now you as Board of Election are dealing with the people who are trying to vote. The line gets long and you've got to navigate them through the parking lot, to which the cars are driving through the parking lot. And you've got candidates who are, they got this yellow line, they can't come past, and they're out, basically heckling everybody in line. And so my point is, to Commissioner O'Grady's point, it's parking, but it's also managing the safety of the people.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be thoughtful about that, particularly as the bank and the other organization comes and they begin to take up space that we just can't impose on, however we want every election cycle. And so I'm concerned about that. And because I think that's just a good point you brought up about managing the cars coming in, but we create this sort of makeshift line that just comes out there and we just twirl it however.
It was interesting because at one point I'm standing out at the back providing coffee. I didn't bring donuts because I was told not to. I brought coffee and hot chocolate for the volunteers. And I look and the queue's going one way. And then I'm engaged in conversation and I turn back around. The next thing I know, the queue's going the other way. And I thought, boy, how'd that happen? That was a sea of humanity. I mean, literally 200 voters were going one way out the door of the building. And then the next time I look, somebody from your organization had to have come out and moved them. Mm-hmm. But then the next thing I know, 20 minutes later, they're going the other way. And there's more of them.
Right.
Very strange. Not very strange. Obviously you guys, somebody came out and organized that, right. But I was like, how did that happen so quickly and so But the point was, to Kevin's point, to Commissioner Boyce's point, how that all happens and how we organize that and how we deal with all of that, that's important stuff when you have all of these people, because it's like game day up there. This was on a Saturday. Mm-hmm. You got folks up there with bands and flags and candidates with lit and materials and the party organizing.
They're almost tailgating out there.
it is tailgating. I'm bringing coffee and hot chocolate, and people are providing donuts and there's all kinds of activity going on. So Commissioner Boyce is correct. We have to manage the bodies, but we also have to manage the traffic. There's cars everywhere. It's an important conversation.
I agree with you that it's managed well. They respond and manage well.
No, we're doing a good job now.
But I think we
can do better.
We need to be looking at it more thoroughly as well, just to be prepared, because again, we do have a lot of people who show up there, and we certainly don't want to have any voter injured by the cars that have
or
to.
volunteers.
One of the things
Or
that
volunteers.
I think we ought to be thoughtful. I'm not a facilities person, so this is not a suggestion. But again, it's the thought process that goes into that there are no barriers there for those folks. And with the cars and traffic, one person loses control. It's such a tight maneuver in there. You lose the slightest bit of control, and somebody could be in danger. And I just, while I think you all managed it to the excellent. I mean, I got in there, I had a meeting, and I thought, well, let me run over and vote. I had like maybe 45 minutes, and it took me about that long to get in, which of a line I never thought I would get through that quickly. So you guys are managing it great, but I just think there's something else that we can do to make sure that there's
everybody's respectful. Sorry, I apologize. Everybody's respectful. All the reports I was getting back from people were that the line was moving tremendously quickly, well managed. I only raise it in that I know these conversations are going on because we've got a big election coming in 2 years. We know that we have more. I mean, frankly, it's fantastic stuff because the area is redeveloping and there's good stuff going on in the Northland area. There's it's very good business and it's great economic development happening. It's all positive. Everything's positive, which creates an issue for you. It's a headache for you, for the board, but it's a good headache. It's a good headache for the community. But because these issues are going on, and because we know we're having these conversations, and because it's a growing concern, we need to be thinking about these things.
Well, it's an opportunity for us to begin more planning on how we address, because you're right, we have folks who can enter that from a couple of different directions going westbound on Morse Road. You can enter it from, come down Carl Road and enter it from that way. You can come heading east and making that left-hand turn right at the entrance of the Board of Elections. So there's so many ways to get in that create the potential for traffic problems.
And I think what we're trying to say, I'm sorry, Marilyn, I apologize, Commissioner Brown. I think what we're trying to say is while we're having these conversations, let's take the opportunity to be proactive about pedestrians, about foot traffic, and about the automobile traffic, in that, it's well managed. The queue is well managed. You guys are getting voters in and out. Great. The volunteers that are up there are being respectful. They're doing their jobs. They're doing everybody's doing great stuff now. I just saw the frustration on the officer's face when she was trying to move traffic through. I heard her being very respectful to motorists, but boy, she was frustrated.
Right.
And I offered her a cup of coffee, and she was like, boy, I could sure use some caffeine. And because she was trying to get cars off of Morse Road, and the cars in the parking lot, the people who'd already gotten off of Morse Road and into the lot weren't being cooperative.
Okay.
And so, and Commissioner Boyce is absolutely correct. Once the people park their car and get out of the car, now you got a sea of humanity moving through that lot, including the volunteers. And Commissioner Brown was probably up there more than any of us.
Yeah, I was very concerned. We do need to take some steps, because we do, particularly in that lane of traffic close to the entrance, where you'll have folks who'll walk that to get to the end of the line.
Right,
And they're
that's
walking in that lane of traffic, trying to keep them over, but providing solutions that will allow us to do that in a much better way to preserve the security of the pedestrians who are in the area.
Especially because we want to encourage people to vote.
Right.
I think this becomes an issue for you to manage, and
Right.
our folks are
Oh,
here.
absolutely. We don't want to have that situation where somebody drives by and says, oh, they see the congestion in the parking lot and they just decide to keep going by. And so we want to improve
I heard very
that.
little of that, if any. So, I
Good.
think you're managing it pretty
Yeah.
well. And I think to get that many people through the process to vote has been impressive. So thank you for that. And that's gone well. And I think you need to work with our team to figure out how best to manage staffing, volunteers, and education.
And we look forward
Forward,
to continuing to do that. Yes.
Commendations to you guys I got so many text messages from people saying what a fantastic job you guys did, on how people were like, people said, it took 40 minutes to vote, but they never stopped moving in the line.
It was great. You guys
I mean, they literally were never, I literally, a neighbor of mine said she and her daughter literally were having a hard time texting me because they were texting and walking, so.
So, well, good. We did get some of that feedback as well of folks who may have approached with a little apprehension because of the line, but then it just moved very quickly and they did a great process. So again, we thank you. And again, we could not have been able to do that without the support that you give us. The equipment, the personnel, the seasonal staffing that we're able to do is all based on the support that you give us. So
It
thank you.
should be noted, I was late to my meeting though, but it was with Animal Control right across.
Right across the street,
Yeah,
okay, so.
Ken wants to jump in.
Administrator Wilson?
Deputy Administrator Long and I definitely have been talking about this and really want to be prepared for 2020. But I have one suggestion. I believe Jeff Young at EMA may have reached out. Within Everbridge, there is a module available which aids through text messaging. It's been used for Red, White, and Boom and other events. If we're able to leverage that system and where voters, potential voters, could get real-time information as to what wait times are and that kind of thing, so that we could be able to give people information, and that will help. I know Jeff Young, Executive Director at EMA, is eager to use that, and it's for large-scale events.
We
And
had
there's
some-
no larger scale event than what we'll be.
Exactly. So we've had a few kind of aside conversations at different, where he's mentioned that, but we haven't had most of the conversations we've had have been around precinct level emergency response. And, but he has mentioned that capability and we can certainly explore that in the coming year.
I know you want to use this tool.
Exactly. He's
'cause
definitely very much excited about the opportunities and the, what it could provide in terms of benefits to our voters.
And it was, like having those generators available on call was a good thing. We were prepared. I was connected to officials, and even when we had those issues with things going down, it's being reported that the voting never stopped. People
Right.
kept voting. It was seamless.
Right, and our equipment does have battery backups. Both the poll pads can operate without power for hours. Our voting machines have battery backups. But again, having no lights in the voting location, it's still difficult to vote. So again, some of our equipment does, and then the new equipment will also have those capabilities. But again, being able to respond to make sure that you can keep a voting location up and operating in a power outage like that and some of these other emergencies is vitally important. So we continue to work with both City of Columbus as well as EMA on ensuring that takes place.
It's extremely important that we make this process as less painful as possible. And it's a long shot, but let's all keep our fingers crossed that we can have more than one voting location available in an area. Counties as big as Franklin County.
Here, here.
Absolutely.
Are there any further
Here.
comments or questions?
No.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. We appreciate it.
And that concludes our budget hearing for today. Our next budget hearing is
Monday, December 3rd.
Monday, December 3rd. All right. See you then. Thank you.